Joe Biden and Donald Trump are in hot water, and a Russian mercenary group attempts a coup in Russia. All that in this episode of the Mayoral Podcast. Welcome back to the Mayoral Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Mayer. Before I get into today's content, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, and share with friends and family if you like what you see here today. So, over the last few days, we've seen a lot of news come out around the scandals involving Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. So, from the New York Post here, an article from Miranda Devine, heroic IRS whistleblower testimony ensnarls Joe and Hunter Biden bribery scheme. Every taxpayer who dutifully hands over their hard-earned cash every year to the government should be enraged by the IRS whistleblower Gary Shapley's testimony about how senior leaders of the Department of Justice, the FBI, and the IRS sabotaged the 5-year investigation into Hunter Biden and allowed him to walk away with a laughably lenient plea deal and unpaid taxes. I think what most people feel when it comes to this scandal, more than anything, is the charges that Hunter Biden are actually getting charged with. These are not charges that you or I or anyone else would be charged with. We'd be hit with serious fines, serious potential jail time, and felonies. Really, the gun charge that's being completely dropped is a felony charge and should be charged as such. We need to go after corporations. They're the ones not paying their taxes. But when it comes to Hunter Biden, it's okay that he doesn't pay his taxes, probably because in all likelihood, the money that he was getting from foreign companies overseas was also being funneled to Joe Biden himself. So Shapley provides further evidence to add to what previously had been reported that Joe Biden lied repeatedly to the American people when he said he knew nothing about his son Hunter's overseas business dealings. I don't think most people really bought that from the beginning, whether or not you believe there was a lot of evidence suggesting that Joe Biden was actually taking money from his son. That always remained to be seen, but the fact that Joe had absolutely no idea that Hunter was being appointed to boards of energy companies over in Ukraine when Joe was the point man for Ukraine during the Obama presidency, knowing that Hunter had absolutely no experience in energy and doesn't even speak Ukrainian. Like there's no reason for him to be on that board other than his last name's Biden. I feel that a lot of people found that hard to believe. So continuing with the piece here. We were in D.C. at the Four Seasons and we were having lunch and Joe stopped in, Walker said in a transcript of Walker's recorded comments provided to the committee. He literally sat down. I don't even think he drank water. I think Hunter said, quote, I may be trying to start a company or tried to do something with these guys, and could you ... And Joe was like, if I'm around, and he showed up. FBI agent Josh Wilson asked, so, I mean, you definitely got the feeling that that was orchestrated by Hunter to have, like, an appearance by his dad at the meeting just to kind of bolster your chances at making the deal work out. Walker said, sure. So I think that this is pretty clear evidence, at least this testimony here, if it is to be believed, that Joe had interactions with these business partners. Not to mention that there's photos that have surfaced around from the Hunter Biden laptop of Joe meeting with these foreign leaders roughly at the same time. There's communications between Hunter Biden, there's email communications and text communications between Hunter Biden and these foreign officials stating that they would like to get a chance to meet his father. And then lo and behold, on his laptop, there's a picture from right around the same time. So again, nobody really believed that Joe Biden had absolutely no idea. There's a beautiful picture of Hunter there. And absolutely no idea that his son was involved in some very nefarious deals overseas. Continue with the piece. But as Shapley pointed out, the entire team had been bullied by the DOJ prosecutors in Delaware into not asking about, quote, the big guy, aka Joe Biden, who was referred to in meetings simply as Dad. Shapley also provided the White House Ways and Means Committee with encrypted WhatsApp messages from Hunter, which were obtained from the search warrant from the first son's iCloud. Now, this is This is really the most damning thing that's come out, in my opinion, linking Joe Biden to Hunter's business deals. Now, there's photos. People could write that off as coincidence. I don't think anyone actually believes that, but plausible deniability would apply there. Now, this transaction or this text exchange on WhatsApp between Hunter and this I believe it's CEF, which is a energy company that's owned by the Chinese Communist Party. This is something that certainly puts Joe right in the crosshairs of the Hunter Biden allegations and the Hunter Biden business dealings. So, in one message sent on July 30th, 2017, Hunter writes to CEFC employee and translator Raymond Zhao, warning him to pay the $5 million he owes his family. Quote, "I'm sitting here with my father, and he would like to understand why the commitment made has not been fulfilled. Tell the director I would like to resolve this now before it gets out of hand, and now means tonight." Hunter warns Zhao that if he doesn't comply, quote, "I will make certain that between the man sitting next to me and every person he knows, and my ability to forever hold a grudge, that you will regret not following my direction. I'm sitting here," I'm assuming that's supposed to be here, not her, "waiting for the call with my father." I don't know what other direct evidence, the media is obviously going to write this off as, well, we can't confirm anything, and there's nothing. This isn't firm evidence. However, these are the same people that ran with the Russia collusion hoax over a low-level Trump campaign associate, George Papadopoulos, speaking of some hearsay with the Russian government at a bar somewhere overseas that led to the Steele dossier and the entire framework for the Trump-Russia collusion story, which was much, much less than text messages directly from the president's son, or in this case, the ex-vice president's son, to a foreign entity like the CEFC, trying to shake them down for cash. That is way more damning than the George Papadopoulos conversation that happened. Not only the connection of obviously how close Hunter is with his father versus George Papadopoulos and Joe Biden, but this is actually in writing. That other thing was a conversation that's hearsay. Now, I'm not saying that conversation didn't transpire. It could have transpired exactly as the filings indicate. That said, it's just a conversation between two people. That's not as incriminating as this. And again, the media is going to write this off as basically nothing. So within a week, $5.1 million was wired to Hunter by CEFC, according to bank records published by Senators Chuck Grassley and Ron Johnson in their September 2020 report into Hunter Biden's corruption. Now, this is obviously a direct link between Hunter and his father and the corruption that ensued with business dealings, peddling the Biden name overseas. Again, this should be the biggest story in American politics, and really the way that the media covers it, and even big tech. For example, I'll pull my screen back up here. Look here, and I just Googled President Joe Biden, and if you look at the top stories, the only one on this top stories here that says anything about Biden's business dealing is Fox News. It says Biden denies lying about Hunter Biden business dealings conversation. So that headline doesn't even really uncover what the big part of the corruption is the payment thereafter from this conversation, how really damning this information could potentially be. You look at The Atlantic, you look at CNBC and New York Times, and everything else seems like it's nothing but sunshine and roses inside the Biden administration. However, you look at Donald Trump, you Google President Donald Trump, and you look at the top stories around Donald Trump, and every single one of these are talking about the classified document scandal. Now, that's not to say that Trump didn't step in it, because I certainly think that he did. But at the same time, the way that this is being covered, the Trump story versus the Biden story, is completely night and day. The mainstream media, look at all these headlines from the mainstream media. Every single one of them is talking about the classified document scandal, and there's not one headline other than the Fox headline, which is a right-wing outlet, discussing or even talking about this Biden potential corruption scheme. I'll go back to it again right here. Biden denies lying about Hunter Biden business dealing conversations. Fox News, all the other ones, the Atlantic. My hometown is getting $100 billion dose of Bidenomics. They're talking about Bidenomics like this is something that's either mainstream or something that's actually helping the American people, which it clearly is not, given the record high inflation rate and the brink of recession that we're on. I'd argue that we already hit a recession last year when we had 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. Well, then the mainstream media decided to rebrand what it means for a recession, and we're not calling that a recession. Fine, whatever. But it's going to get worse, and this Bidenomics thing is kind of out of the clear blue sky. New York Times, can Bidenomics revive Biden's 2024 presidential bid? Biden announces $42 billion high-speed internet initiative, CNBC. These things, these mainstream media outlets, this is why people are turning to independent sources when it comes to news. Nobody believes this anymore. There's absolutely no coverage of Joe Biden doing or talking about his son's corrupt business dealings and the direct link of Hunter and Joe Biden that now exists. That said, Donald Trump, in my opinion, really stepped in it with this classified document scandal. The leaked audio just came out from CNN, and it really indicates everything that the transcripts are saying in terms of what Trump was saying and what he was potentially showing to people. Obviously, we're not going to be able to see it, but it is a recording between Trump and these people that were doing a autobiography on Mike Pompeo or somebody like that. So here's the audio from CNN recording of Donald Trump talking about the classified documents.
Breaking news. We have obtained what is expected to be a central piece of the government's case against Donald Trump. The actual audio recording of the former president talking as if he's showing a highly classified document on U.S. war plans against Iran with people not cleared to even know it exists, let alone what's in it. In a moment, only on CNN, you will hear what jurors will hear one day. The recording was made 2 summers ago, July 2021, at the former president's club in Bedminster, New Jersey. You will clearly hear the former president as he is speaking to several people. According to the special counsel's indictment, they include a writer working on Mark Meadows' memoir, the publisher, and 2 of Trump's staff members. The president was aware he was being recorded. This is the first time it is being played publicly.
These are bad, sick people.
That was your coup, against you.
Well, it started right at the beginning.
Like when Milley's talking about, you were going to try to do a coup. No, they were trying to do that before you even were sworn in.
That's right.
Trying to overthrow your election.
Well, with Milley, let me see that. I'll show you an example. He said that I wanted to attack Iran. Isn't it amazing? I have a big pile of papers. This thing just came up. Look. This was him. They presented me this. This is off the record, but they presented me this. This was him. This was the Defense Department and him. Wow. We looked at some. This was him. This wasn't done by me. This was him. All sorts of stuff. It's pages long. Look. Wait a minute. Let's see here.
Yeah.
I just found, isn't that amazing? This totally wins my case, Mm-hmm. Except it is like highly confidential, secret. This is secret information. But look at this. You attack, and
Hillary would print that out all the time,
she'd send it. No, she'd send it to Anthony Weiner, the pervert.
Please print.
By the way, isn't that incredible? Though?
Yeah.
I was just saying because we were talking about it, and he said he wanted to attack Iran and what. These are the papers. This was done by the military, given to me. I think we can probably, right?
I don't know. We'll have to see. Yeah, we'll have to try to
Declassify.
figure out
See, as president, I could have declassified it. Now I can't, but this is classified.
Now we have a problem.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
It's so cool. I mean, it's so. Look, we here I have, And you probably almost didn't believe me, but now you believe me.
No, I believe
It's
you.
incredible, right?
No,
Hey, bring some Cokes in, please.
So you heard there the audio recording of Donald Trump talking about classified documents, presumably these classified documents that he had in his possession, showing them to people that clearly did not have the clearance, also commenting that these were still classified. I don't think this bodes well for Donald Trump's case. The original statement from the president and his team back when the original raid on Mar-a-Lago had occurred were that he was the president and everything that they took was declassified. He declassified them themselves. And now in that recording, he says that they're still classified, which again is not a good look for the Trump defense. That said, unless that audio had been shared with the Defense Department or the judge who issued the search warrant, I'm not sure what evidence they had to properly issue the search warrant. They may have had the proper evidence. They may have had an adequate reason. But in the United States, you can't look for somebody and then find a reason to issue a search warrant. You need to have reasonable cause for that search warrant. Now, I guess we'll see in the coming months if they did have adequate cause to issue a search warrant. But that would be, in my estimation, probably the best way for Trump to potentially get out of this, because it's unconstitutional to issue these warrants without having some type of probable cause to actually get the raid, and the raid led to the actual uncovering of these classified documents. So without that evidence prior to that, which I don't know, maybe they had it, maybe they didn't have it, this might be a grounds for Donald Trump and his defense team to use to say there wasn't probable cause to execute a search warrant. Therefore, everything that was uncovered from the search warrant is not admissible in court. We'll see. I really have no idea. I'm just kind of speculating as to what the Trump defense team could potentially be conjuring up next with regards to these charges. Meanwhile, over in Russia, there was a coup that lasted nearly 24 hours, which leads to the question to what is actually going on over in Russia. Now, I don't believe the propaganda that's coming out from the Russian side. I don't believe the propaganda that's coming out from the Ukrainian side with regards to this war. What really happened in Russia over the weekend is really anyone's guess. But according to CNBC, Putin's weakness laid bare after 24 hours of rebellion in Russia. With a so-called 24-hour coup by Russia's mercenary boss, Yevgeny Prigozhin, ending in an anticlimactic pullback, Russian President Vladimir Putin was able to avoid a dramatic, bloody standoff with his one-time ally. This leads the question to what is really going on in Russia. If there's somebody that's been a long-time ally, a person that was essentially made the man that he is today by Vladimir Putin, that's in open rebellion against him, how does that look to Putin? What does that mean in terms of the war in Ukraine? What does that mean for kind of what the future holds for Russia in general? And I think a lot of people would say, hey, if we get rid of Putin, things are going to be great or things are going to be better. But you just never know. If, for example, this guy becomes the next president of Russia, this guy might be even worse than Vladimir Putin. You never know. This is not a good person. Putin is not a good person. So swapping one bad person for another bad person isn't always going to lead to something better. In a lot of cases, it's going to lead to something worse. So continuing with the article, Prigozhin's armed rebellion indicates a political crisis within Russia and shatters the myth of Russia's invincibility and overwhelming power. Hannah Lebakov, a resident fellow with the Atlantic Council Eurasia Center, and journalist and researcher from Belarus, said in a note on Sunday. Prigozhin and his mercenary forces on Saturday seized one of the Russian military's key bases in the south of the country and the city of Rostov-on-Don before proceeding north to Moscow. However, the rebellion was dramatically called off before the rebels reached the capital city. So there was a peace that was brokered between Belarus, the president of Belarus, this Wagner group, which is the group of mercenaries that is led by this Prigozhin, and Vladimir Putin. So thankfully, nothing more than that happened. However, what does that mean in terms of Vladimir Putin moving forward? How does this make him look with his base? How does this make him look in the eyes of the average Russian person? How does this make him look inside the Kremlin? This seems like a fairly weak interaction between Putin and a one-time ally. So, continuing on with the article, Prigozhin called off his uprising en route to Moscow following talks with Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, saying he wanted to avoid bloodshed. The extraordinary events stoked speculation about exactly who knew what and when, and whether any collusion with Western powers, Wafer said. All of these and more will dominate conversations and coverage in the coming days and week, he said, although Macro Advisory believed the Russian media would seem to minimize the incident. Again, this is going to be something, who knows who was involved. I'm not indicating that there was any involvement by anyone in the West. There's no evidence of that. But if there was, of course, there's going to be a denial from any government that potentially would have been in favor of trying to get Prigozhin to stage a coup within Russia himself. The Kremlin will now urgently feel compelled to show some battlefield success, that its objectives in Ukraine are being achieved, and it will need to ensure the economic stays on the current recovery path. After Putin initially railing against Prigozhin's treachery on national television, the Kremlin, just hours later, said a deal had been reached in which criminal charges against Prigozhin would be dropped and he would be moved to Belarus along with fighters that had participated in the mutiny. Now, I don't think that looks anything other than weak. The fact that this guy was able to spark a rebellion and Putin just sat there and essentially not necessarily let it happen, but couldn't do anything to fight it off, and is going to pardon this guy, that doesn't seem like something that any country would do, let alone Russia. Whether the Kremlin's apparent tolerance lasts and whether Prigozhin is safe is unclear. Geopolitical analyst Ian Bremmer described the mercenary boss as a, quote, dead man walking, and Prigozhin has not been seen or heard in public since leaving Rostodon on Saturday night. If Prigozhin does not pay a heavy price for his rebellion, it will put the Putin regime in serious danger, Brian Whitmore, a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasian Center, said in a note. Again, this is what I've been hinting towards. If Putin doesn't, unfortunately, if he doesn't drop the hammer on this guy, you're going to see a large swath of people, even within the Kremlin, that are going to question his strength. And when you have somebody like Vladimir Putin, who is clearly mentally unstable, a all-around terrible human being that has, 2,500, 3,000 nuclear warheads, and he feels he's backed in the corner, this is not going to bode well for anyone. The best solution has got to be ending this Ukrainian war with Putin being able to claim some type of victory and stopping this from escalating into World War III and from nuclear warheads being used. Continuing on, this is because political change comes to Russia when three factors are present. A divided elite, check. A dissatisfied public, check. And an absence of fear. If fear is removed from the equation, then the regime will be in peril, Whitmore said. The power struggle is on, Christopher Granville, managing director of global political research at TS Lombard, told CNBC on Monday, arguing it was now more uncertain whether Putin would seek another term in office at the presidential election in 2024. There is now a nationalist opposition populist figure who is now relegated to exile in Belarus, and the question is, will he stay there quietly, he said, questioning the extent of the rebellion's failure. The compromise with Prigozhin was such that he lost what he was fighting for, which was to maintain his Wagner fighting forces' independence. He lost the battle, but he has also won. In that article, they mentioned it's possible that Vladimir Putin does not run in 2024, which generally speaking, you would think would be a great thing. I feel that you never know who is up next. So as bad as one regime is, it could potentially be even worse. There's a reason why these countries across the world and throughout time have always ended up in as bad, if not worse situations when there's a change of leadership. Now, could it be Alexei Navalny? I think he would be good for that country and be good for the relationships with not only the United States, but the rest of Western Europe. He's currently locked away as the political opposition of Vladimir Putin. So right off the bat, without knowing much more than that, you'd have to say if Putin thinks that this guy's a threat to him, that's probably good for the rest of the world and for the Russian people. That said, is it potentially this Yevgeny Prigozhin? According to CBS News, who is Yevgeny Prigozhin? Prigozhin is a mastermind of media and is also the mastermind of social media, said Katerina Stepanenko, a Russian analyst at the Institute for the Study of War and Public Policy Research based in Washington, D.C. While Putin and his propagandists have been dominating the Russian television and traditional outlets, Prigozhin is innovative because he has weaponized a network of military correspondents, and bloggers. The article continues. And again, he's the leader of this Wagner group. Wagner group first popped up in Ukraine in 2014 when soldiers in unmarked uniforms appeared to help pro-Russian forces illegally annex territory for Russia. Before that, the group is believed to have been involved in supporting Russian forces in Syria. Now, this is really what this mercenary group is. They are essentially an extension of Putin's wing of his military that even the military won't do. So these are a bunch of bad characters that Prigozhin is in charge of. And obviously they staged a coup. How real was the coup? Who really knows? But ultimately the coup itself has made Putin look relatively weak. In 2022, the private army became a major part of Russia's invasion, even recruiting fighters from Russian prisons and promising them pardons to beef up numbers on the battlefield, though Prigozhin said in February that the practice would be stopped. I'm sure this guy is absolutely going to do that. The best kind of person you ever met, this Prigozhin. In addition to deploying Wagner troops to Ukraine, the Wagner Group has been active in Africa, where some nations have turned to the private army to fill security gaps or prop up dictatorial regimes. Now, here's a claim, just giving you an example of the people that this guy leads and why it's not necessarily better that he would take over for Vladimir Putin. Not saying that this would be the guy, but there's always, history is filled with this, guys. It's filled with Vladimir Lenin to Joseph Stalin. History is filled with these examples where it's bad and you don't think it gets worse, and then it gets even worse. In some countries like Central African Republic, Wagner exchanges services for almost unfettered access to natural resources. A CBS News investigation found that Russian cargo flights stopped in the country twice a week, possibly smuggling billions of dollars worth of gold back to Russia. You never know what is going to be worse, the current regime or the next regime. Most people across the Western world would like to see Vladimir Putin out of power in Russia, but we need to be careful that the next person is not actually worse than Vladimir Putin. That's it for this episode of the Mayoral Podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. Please hit the like button, subscribe, share with friends and family if you like the content you've seen here today. I will see you all in the next video.